Mother's Day had always felt strange in our house. When I was little, I thought it was supposed to be the happiest day of the year for Mom. Teachers would have us make cards with glitter and crooked hearts, and I would bring mine home with this proud, hopeful feeling in my chest. I imagined my mom smiling, maybe even hugging me. Sometimes she did smile, but it was never the warm kind. As I grew older, I started noticing the pattern. Mother's Day wasn't about celebrating her. It was about proving ourselves to her. The house had to look perfect. The gifts had to be meaningful enough. The cards had to say exactly the right things. And even then, it usually wasn't enough. My older brother Jason never worried about it. He was the golden child. Everything he did was impressive. If he bought Mom flowers, she would talk about them for weeks. My younger sister Leela was different. She was the fragile one, the baby. Mom treated her like glass. If Leela forgot a gift or came late, Mom would just sigh and say she had always been a little scatterbrained. But me, I was the one who tried too hard. Or at least that's what Mom always said. By the time I was 26, I had stopped expecting approval. But I still hoped, somewhere deep down, that one day she would look at me the way other mothers looked at their daughters. Proud. Warm. Loving that year. Jason and his wife were hosting the Mother's Day brunch at their house. They lived in a big suburban home with a wide backyard and a kitchen island that looked like something out of a magazine. When I arrived, the house was already full of the smell of coffee, bacon, and those sugary pastries Mom liked. Jason greeted me at the door with a quick hug. "You're late," he joked. "It's 10 minutes," I said. Mom noticed. Of course she did. Inside, Leela was arranging flowers in a tall glass vase while Mom sat at the table sipping a mimosa like some kind of queen presiding over her court. "Happy Mother's Day," I said as I walked over. She looked up briefly. Not exactly the reaction you'd hope for. Jason's wife, Emily, gave me a sympathetic smile from the kitchen. "Food's almost ready," she said. My stepdad, Mark, was flipping pancakes on the stove, humming quietly like he always did when tension started filling the room. I sat down at the table and placed the gift I'd brought in front of Mom. It wasn't expensive, but it meant something. For the past 2 weeks I had been working on a photo album. I dug through old boxes of pictures, family vacations, birthdays, random candid moments. There were photos of Mom holding us when we were little, laughing at the beach, blowing out candles at Christmas. Memories, the kind that proved we had once been a normal family. "I made you something," I said quietly. She looked at the album like it was a bill she didn't want to pay. Jason sat down across from me while Leela joined us with the flowers. "Open it, Mom," Leela said. Mom finally picked up the album. She flipped through the pages slowly. I watched her face carefully, searching for some kind of reaction. A smile. A laugh. Anything. Instead, her expression grew more and more irritated. Halfway through the album, she let out a long sigh. The sound cut through the room. Jason looked up. "What's wrong?" Mom closed the album and placed it on the table like it had personally offended her. "You always try too hard," she said. For a second I thought I'd heard her wrong. "What? This?" she said, tapping the album. "It's excessive." Jason laughed awkwardly. "Mom, it's just a gift." She shook her head. "No, it's guilt." The room went silent. My stomach tightened. "I don't understand," I said. Mom leaned back in her chair, folding her arms as she looked at me. It wasn't a warm look. It was the kind someone gives when they're tired of dealing with the same problem over and over again. "You always do this," she said. "Do what?" "You make everything emotional. Everything dramatic?" "It's a photo album," I said carefully. "Yes, exactly." No one else spoke. Leela stared down at the table. Jason rubbed his temple like he wished the conversation would disappear. I felt heat creeping up my neck. "I thought you might like it," I said. Mom gave a short laugh. "That's the problem?" "What problem?" She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on mine. "You need constant validation." The words hit like a slap. "I don't. Every holiday becomes about you," she continued. "Your feelings. Your effort. Your need for appreciation." My chest tightened. "That's not true," she shrugged. "Isn't it?" Jason shifted in his chair. "Mom, maybe we should just eat." But she ignored him. She kept looking straight at me. "You know what the best Mother's Day gift would be," she said calmly. The question hung in the air. No one answered. Even Mark stopped flipping pancakes. Mom's gaze didn't move from my face. If you just disappeared from this family. For a moment, I didn't process the words. They floated in the air like something unreal. Then they landed, Leela gasped quietly. Jason let out a nervous laugh. Mom. Come on, he said. That's harsh. But she didn't smile, she didn't backtrack. I'm serious, she said. The room felt suddenly smaller, quieter. This family would be peaceful if you weren't in it. I waited. I waited for Jason to defend me. For Leela to say something. For Mark to tell her she was going too far. No one did. Jason just looked uncomfortable. Leela stared at her hands. Mark flipped another pancake, and in that moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not even sadness. Just a quiet, heavy understanding. They weren't shocked because they disagreed. They were shocked because she said it out loud. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement made everyone look at me. I picked up my purse from the back of the chair. Where are you going? Jason asked. I looked at my mom. Her expression was completely calm, like she had just stated a simple fact. Okay, I said. She frowned slightly. Okay, what? If that's what you want, I said quietly. I'll give it to you. Confusion flickered across the table. What are you talking about? Leela asked. But I was already walking toward the door. Jason stood up halfway. Hey, don't be dramatic. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like crying. I didn't feel like defending myself. I just felt done. You said the best gift I could give you was disappearing, I said. Mom didn't respond. So that's what I'll do. Jason scoffed. You're overreacting. Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. But something deep inside me knew one thing with absolute clarity. If I stayed, nothing would ever change. So I opened the door, stepped outside, and walked away. No one followed me. The first few days after I walked out of Jason's house felt unreal. It was like stepping out of a loud, crowded room into sudden silence. For years my phone had been filled with family group chats, reminders, favors, guilt, trips, and long messages about how I needed to be more understanding. Now there was nothing. The quiet felt almost suspicious. Part of me kept expecting my phone to light up with messages. An apology from Mom, a concerned text from Leela, even Jason telling me I had overreacted. But the screen stayed dark. On the second day I checked it 3 times before lunch. By the third day I forced myself to stop looking at it every 10 minutes. Still nothing. That silence hurt more than the words she had said. At least when she told me to disappear, I had felt something clear: shock, humiliation, anger. But the silence was different. It made me question everything. Did they really mean it? Did they actually want me gone? I tried to distract myself with work. My job had always been the one place where I felt somewhat capable. I worked at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. Nothing glamorous but stable enough to keep me busy. Normally Mondays started with messages from Mom asking if I could pick something up for her or help Leela with something. That week, there was nothing. When I got home from work that evening, I sat on my couch staring at my phone. Still nothing. By the end of the week, I started to realize something I wasn't ready to accept. They weren't going to reach out. They weren't worried about me. They weren't even curious. It was like I had already vanished. For the first time in years, I had a weekend with no family plans, no obligations, no pressure to show up somewhere and pretend everything was fine. I woke up late on Saturday morning, confused by the quiet in my apartment. Usually Mom would have called by then asking why I hadn't returned a text. Instead, sunlight spilled through the curtains and the only sound was a neighbor's dog barking somewhere outside. I made coffee. I sat on the balcony, and I realized I had absolutely nothing I was supposed to do. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt peaceful. The next few weeks were strange. Without the constant pull of family drama, my schedule opened up in ways I hadn't expected. I started going for evening walks. I stayed late at work sometimes just because I enjoyed finishing projects without rushing. Still, there were moments when the silence came crashing back, like when I passed a restaurant my family used to go to and instinctively reached for my phone before remembering there was no one to text, or when I saw a Mother's Day display still hanging in a store window and felt a knot form in my chest. But slowly, something began to change. One evening after work, I found myself sitting in my car outside my apartment building, staring at the steering wheel. My chest felt tight and heavy in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I had spent years trying to convince myself that my family dynamic was normal, that every mother criticized their daughter, that every sibling quietly chose sides. But that day, I finally admitted something to myself. I needed help. A week later, I walked into a small therapist's office for the first time in my life. The waiting room smelled faintly like lavender and old books. I sat there nervously twisting the strap of my bag while wondering if I was overreacting. Maybe my mom had just been having a bad day. Maybe I should have stayed and talked it out. But when the therapist called my name and I sat down across from her, the first thing she asked was simple. "What brings you here?" The answer came out before I could stop it. My mom told me the best Mother's Day gift would be if I disappeared from the family. The therapist didn't look shocked. She didn't try to defend my mom. She just nodded slowly. "And how did that make you feel?" The question cracked something open inside me. For the next hour I talked more honestly than I ever had in my life. I told her about the years of criticism, the constant pressure to prove myself, the way every holiday somehow turned into a test I was destined to fail. I talked about Jason being the golden child and Leela always being protected. And I talked about the moment at the table when everyone stayed silent. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then the therapist said something that stayed with me long after that first session. "Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do," she said gently, "step away from people who only value you when you're useful to them." Useful. That word stuck with me. Because when I looked back on the last 10 years, I started to see the pattern clearly. I was the one who helped Mom organize appointments. I was the one who mediated arguments between Jason and Leela. I was the one who remembered birthdays, planned holidays, brought thoughtful gifts. I wasn't the favorite. I was the fixer, and when I stopped fixing things, I became unnecessary. That realization hurt, but it also brought a strange kind of clarity. Over the next few months, therapy became part of my routine. Each session peeled back another layer of things I had never allowed myself to question. Why did I always feel responsible for everyone else's emotions? Why did I apologize for things that weren't my fault? Why did I keep trying to earn love that was never freely given? The answers weren't easy, but little by little, I started changing things. At work, I stopped volunteering for every extra task just to prove I was reliable. Instead, I focused on doing my own projects well. One afternoon, my manager called me into his office. I expected criticism. Instead, he smiled. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said. "You've been doing great work lately." I blinked in surprise. "Thanks. We're restructuring the team," he continued, "and I think you'd be a good fit for a leadership role." The promotion came 3 months later. It wasn't life-changing money, but it felt like validation I had never received at home. Around the same time, I made another decision that would have terrified the old version of me. I started looking for my own place. Up until then, I had been renting a small apartment, always keeping things temporary, because part of me assumed my family would eventually pull me back into their orbit. But now, with distance growing between us, I realized something. I could build a life that had nothing to do with them. A year after that Mother's Day, I signed the papers for a small condo on the edge of the city. It wasn't huge. Just 2 bedrooms and a balcony overlooking a row of trees. But when I walked through the empty rooms for the first time, keys in my hand, I felt something new. Pride. The place slowly filled with furniture, plants, and pieces of art I chose simply because I liked them. A few months later, I adopted a rescue dog from a shelter. She was a nervous little black mutt with huge ears and cautious eyes. The shelter had named her Luna. The first night she slept curled up at the foot of my bed, and I remember lying there in the dark listening to her soft breathing. My life was quieter now. Simpler. Peaceful in a way I had never experienced before. 2 years passed like that. 2 full years without hearing from my mother. Without family holidays. Without guilt-filled phone calls. Sometimes I wondered if they ever talked about me. But mostly, I stopped thinking about them at all. Then one evening, As I was sitting on my couch with Luna asleep beside me, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen. A name I hadn't seen in 2 years stared back at me. Jason. My older brother. The golden child. He almost never called unless he needed something. For a moment I considered ignoring it. But curiosity crept in. And against my better judgment, I picked up the phone and answered. Hello? When I heard Jason's voice after 2 years, the first thing I noticed was how unfamiliar it sounded. Not because it had changed, but because I had changed. There was a time when hearing my brother call would have filled me with anxiety. My brain would immediately start preparing. What did he need? What problem was coming? What favor would I be asked to handle this time? But as I sat on my couch with Luna sleeping beside me, I just felt curious. Hello, I said. There was a brief pause on the other end. Hey, Jason said. His voice carried that awkward tone people use when they're trying to pretend nothing strange has happened. Hey, I replied calmly. Another pause stretched between us. So how have you been? He asked. I almost laughed. 2 years of silence, and that was the opening line. I've been good, I said. That's good. More silence. Jason had never been good with uncomfortable conversations. Growing up, he usually avoided them altogether. Mom would criticize me, and he'd disappear into another room. Now he sounded like he wished he could do the same thing. Finally he cleared his throat. Listen, we should probably talk. About what? There was a long exhale. Not on the phone, he said. Can I come by? I looked around my living room. 2 years ago, if he had asked to come over, I would have cleaned the entire apartment before he arrived. I would have worried about what he thought of my furniture, my job, my life. Now the thought barely registered. Sure, I said. He arrived about an hour later. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize him. Jason had always been confident, polished, the kind of guy who walked into rooms like he belonged there. But the man standing on my porch looked tired, his shoulders slumped slightly. Dark circles sat under his eyes. He stepped inside slowly, glancing around the condo. This is nice, he said. Thanks. Luna walked up to him cautiously, sniffing his shoes. You got a dog? He asked. Yeah. He crouched down to pet her, and for a moment the tension in the room softened. Then he stood back up. We should talk, he said again. I gestured toward the couch. He sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. For a few seconds he stared at the floor like he was rehearsing something in his head. Finally he said it. Mom's sick. The words hit my chest like a sudden drop in temperature. I didn't move. What kind of sick? I asked carefully. Jason rubbed the back of his neck. She was diagnosed about 4 months ago. With what? He hesitated before answering. Cancer. The word sat heavy in the air between us. For a moment I just stared at him, waiting for the emotional wave I assumed would come. But the feeling that rose inside me wasn't grief. It was confusion. 4 months. She had been sick for 4 months. And no one had told me. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Okay, I said. Jason looked up, surprised. That's it. What else would you like me to say? He frowned slightly. I thought you'd be, I don't know, more upset. I let out a slow breath. Jason. She told me the best gift I could give her was disappearing from the family. He shifted uncomfortably. Yev, about that. Did she apologize? No. Did she say she was wrong? He looked away. No? Then why are you here? Jason ran a hand through his hair. She wants to see you. The sentence hung in the room. For a second I thought he might be joking. She wants to see me, I repeated. Yeah. After 2 years. Yeah, and she hasn't apologized. Jason didn't respond. I leaned forward slightly. Did she ask you to come get me? Another pause. Not exactly, he admitted. What does that mean? He rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them. It's just things have been really hard. Something in his tone shifted. It wasn't emotional. It was practical. I recognized that tone. What exactly do you want, Jason? He looked up. We need help. There it was. Not love. Not regret. Need. With what? I asked. He hesitated again, clearly choosing his words carefully. Mom's treatment schedule is intense. She has appointments constantly, chemo sessions, insurance paperwork. It's a lot. And Leela's overwhelmed, he said. She's trying to balance work and helping Mom. Emily's busy with the kids. I've been covering what I can, but you want me to take over. Jason opened his mouth, then closed it. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Silence filled the room again. 2 years ago, I might have felt guilty hearing that they were struggling. I might have immediately started asking how I could help, rearranging my life to make things easier for them. But now I just felt clarity. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. Jason watched me carefully. For 2 years, no one contacted me. He didn't argue. You didn't check if I was okay. You didn't ask how I was doing. You didn't even send a message on holidays. Jason stared at the carpet. And now you're here because things are difficult. He finally looked up. She's still your mother? And I was still her daughter when she told me to disappear? He winced slightly. That was a long time ago. No, I said quietly. That was the last thing she ever said to me. Jason rubbed his forehead. You're holding on to one moment. I couldn't help but smile at that. One moment. My voice stayed calm, but something inside it hardened. You mean the moment where my entire family sat at a table and listened while Mom told me my existence ruined the peace? Jason didn't respond. You mean the moment where no one defended me? Still silence. You mean the moment where I walked out and not a single person followed? His jaw tightened. That's not fair. What part isn't fair? He exhaled heavily. Look, we all said things we regret. Did you regret them enough to call me? Jason didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. The silence hadn't been an accident, it had been convenient. For them. I stood up from my chair. Jason looked confused. What are you doing? I walked toward the door and opened it. I'm sorry, I said. He blinked. For what? For the inconvenience. His expression hardened slightly. You're really going to do this? Do what? Turn your back on your own family. I leaned against the doorframe. You fired me from the family 2 years ago. That's not what happened. Then why didn't anyone call? Jason didn't have an answer. Luna padded over and sat beside my leg, her tail lightly brushing the floor. Jason stood slowly. So that's it? He asked. I nodded. That's it. She's sick. I hope she gets the care she needs. He stared at me like he was waiting for something more. An apology, a breakdown, anything. But the person he remembered wasn't standing there anymore. Finally, he shook his head. I don't recognize you? I gave a small, calm smile. That's because for the first time in my life, I said, I'm not playing my role. Jason walked toward the door, frustration written across his face. As he stepped outside, he turned back one last time. You're going to regret this. Maybe he believed that. Maybe the old version of me would have believed it too. But the person standing there now knew something he didn't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't choosing them. I was choosing myself. And then I closed the door. 3 weeks passed after Jason's visit. I expected another call, maybe from him again. Maybe from Leela. Part of me thought someone would eventually try a different approach. Guilt, anger, or even kindness. But nothing came. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. Work during the day. Walks with Luna in the evening. Therapy once a week. I had gotten used to the calm that came with distance, and I guarded it carefully. Then one Tuesday evening, my phone rang while I was cooking dinner. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. Leela. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. Our relationship had always been complicated. Growing up, she had been the one person I sometimes felt close to, but she had also learned very early how to survive in our family by staying on Mom's good side, which usually meant staying silent when Mom went after me. The phone kept ringing. Finally, I picked it up. Hello. What came through the speaker wasn't the calm voice I expected. It was crying. Heavy, shaking sobs. Hey, I said cautiously. I can't do this anymore. Leela choked out. I pulled the phone away from my ear slightly, surprised. What's going on? She tried to speak, but the words came out tangled in tears. Everything's a mess. A long pause followed while she tried to collect herself. Normally, I would have jumped straight into problem-solving mode. That had always been my role. But this time I stayed quiet. Eventually her breathing slowed. Can we meet? She asked. I hesitated. Meeting family again felt like stepping toward a door I had intentionally closed. But curiosity crept in, and maybe a small part of me still wanted to understand what had happened after I left. Okay, I said. Tomorrow. We met the next afternoon at a small coffee shop, halfway between our neighborhoods. It was one of those quiet places with soft music and big windows that let sunlight spill across the tables. I arrived first. When Leela walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. She wore a sweatshirt that looked like it hadn't been washed in a few days. She spotted me and walked over quickly, sitting down across from me. For a few seconds we just stared at each other. It had been 2 years. "You look good," she said finally. "You look tired." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "That's accurate." A barista brought her coffee, and she wrapped both hands around the cup like she needed its warmth. "So," I said, "what's going on?" She looked down at the table. "Mom keeps asking about you." That caught me off guard. "What does she say?" Leela hesitated. "Mostly that you abandoned her." I leaned back in my chair. The sentence didn't hurt the way it once would have. Instead, it felt almost predictable. "She fired me from the family," I said calmly. Leela sighed. "You know she didn't mean it like that." I raised an eyebrow. How exactly did she mean it? She was just frustrated. Frustrated enough to tell me to disappear. Leela didn't answer. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching the liquid swirl. "You know how she is," she said quietly. Yes, I did know. And that was exactly the problem. For years everyone in the family had used that same sentence to excuse her behavior. "That's just how she is." Like cruelty was a personality trait no one could challenge. "What's really going on, Leela?" I asked. She took a long breath. Then she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "You weren't the only one she treated like that." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Lila glanced around the cafe before continuing. "Things have been really bad since you left." "How?" "At first everyone thought it would calm down," she said. "Mom kept saying the house felt peaceful without all the drama." The words echoed something my mother had said that day at brunch, but Leela's tone carried something darker. "That didn't last," she continued. "What happened?" Leela let out a tired laugh. "You were the buffer." "The buffer." "You were always the one she focused on," Leela explained. "If she was angry, it went toward you. If something went wrong, it was somehow your fault." I stared at her. And once I was gone. She needed a new target. The realization hit me slowly. "And that was you." Leela nodded. "At first it was small stuff. Criticizing my job, my apartment, the way I handled Mom's appointments." Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "But lately it's been worse." "How?" "She tells people I'm selfish," Leela said quietly. "That I don't care enough about her illness." I felt a familiar heaviness settle in my chest. The pattern was repeating, just with a new person in my place. "And Jason?" I asked. Leela gave a bitter smile. "He stays out of it. Like always." "Of course he did." Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "You know what she's been telling everyone about you?" I shook my head. "What?" "That you had some kind of breakdown." I blinked. "What?" "She says you cut us off because you couldn't handle criticism," Leela said. "That you've always been emotionally unstable." For a moment I just stared at her. The lie was so blatant it almost felt surreal. "She told our relatives that?" I asked. Leela nodded slowly. "Aunts, cousins, pretty much everyone?" "And Jason?" Another pause. "He's been agreeing with her." Something inside me settled into a calm, solid place. 2 years ago, hearing that would have crushed me. I would have rushed to defend myself, to explain my side of the story. But now I just understood something important. The narrative had already been written. I had been cast as the villain. Leela watched my face nervously. "You're not upset." I shrugged slightly. "It's not surprising. But people think you abandoned Mom while she's sick." I took a sip of my coffee. And doesn't that bother you?" I looked at her carefully. "Does the truth bother you?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You were there," I said quietly. "You saw what happened at that table." Leela looked down again. "Yes. So you know I didn't abandon anyone." She didn't argue. For a moment we sat in silence. Then she said something softly. "I wish you had stayed." That made me pause. "Why?" "Because everything's falling apart now." The words hung in the air between us. And suddenly I understood the real reason she had called. Not to reconnect. Not to apologize. To recruit. You want me to come back, I said. Leela's eyes widened slightly. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Her shoulders slumped. I just thought maybe you could help. There it was again. Help. The same word Jason had used, the same expectation. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window for a moment, watching people walk past on the sidewalk. For years I had believed my role in the family was to keep things together, to absorb tension, to fix problems no one else wanted to deal with. But sitting there now, something felt different. Clearer. What if I don't want to help anymore? I asked quietly. Leela looked stunned. Then what happens to Mom? I met her eyes. That's not my responsibility. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I could see the conflict in her expression. Years of family conditioning fighting against the possibility that things didn't have to stay the same. Then she asked the question she probably hadn't meant to say out loud. So what are you going to do? I finished the last sip of my coffee, and for the first time since hearing about the lies my mother had spread, I felt completely calm. I'm going to tell the truth. When I left the coffee shop after meeting Leela, I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. 2 years earlier, finding out my family was spreading lies about me would have sent me into a spiral of panic and desperation. I would have started calling relatives, explaining myself, trying to repair my reputation piece by piece. But as I drove home that afternoon, something inside me felt steady, calm. For the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. I didn't need to chase the truth. The truth already existed. I just had to stop hiding it. That evening I took Luna for a walk around the small park near my condo. The air was cool, the sun dipping low behind the trees. Luna trotted beside me happily, occasionally stopping to sniff every lamppost like it was the most fascinating discovery in the world. I watched her for a moment and smiled. Dogs had a way of making life simple. They didn't care about family politics or reputation. They cared about food, affection, and whether you showed up for them. Somewhere along the path, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I opened it. 3 words. You embarrassed me. Even without a name attached, I knew who it was. Mom. For a long moment I just stared at the screen. No greeting, no explanation, no apology, just accusation. The same pattern she had always followed. Something goes wrong. Someone else must be blamed. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and continued walking. The message didn't hurt the way it once would have. Instead, it felt like confirmation. Nothing had changed. That night after dinner, I sat at my desk with my laptop open. The screen glowed softly in the dim light of the room. For several minutes, I just stared at the blank page. My hands rested on the keyboard, but I hadn't started typing yet, because once I did, there would be no going back. For most of my life, I had protected my family's image. No matter how bad things got behind closed doors, I never talked about it publicly. I believed that loyalty meant silence, but silence had never protected me. It had only protected them, so I started typing. Not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. I wrote about Mother's Day 2 years ago. I described the brunch at Jason's house, the photo album I had made, and the moment my mom closed it with that irritated sigh. I wrote down her exact words. The best Mother's Day gift would be if you disappeared from the family. I described the silence at the table. Jason looking uncomfortable. Leela staring at her hands. No one speaking up. Then I wrote about walking out the door. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't insult anyone. I simply told the story the way it happened. When I reached the end, I added one final paragraph. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is accept the gift someone gives you, even if that gift is freedom. I read the post twice. My heart beat a little faster, not from fear, from anticipation. Then I clicked publish. The internet has a strange way of moving faster than real life. Within an hour, a few friends had reacted to the post. Some sent messages asking if I was okay. Others simply left supportive comments. By midnight, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years had shared it. By morning, everything had exploded. My phone buzzed constantly as notifications poured in, messages from relatives, aunts, uncles, even people I barely remembered meeting. The pattern in the messages was almost identical. Wait, this isn't what we heard. Your mom told us something completely different. Are you saying she told you to leave? Apparently, the story my mother had been telling everyone was very different. According to her version, I had cut contact because I was too sensitive to handle criticism. She had painted me as unstable, emotional, impossible to reason with. But the problem with lies is that they don't survive long when witnesses exist. Jason's wife, Emily, had been at the table that day. My stepdad had been standing in the kitchen. Leela had heard every word, and slowly, quietly, people began connecting the dots. Late that afternoon, my phone rang again. Another unknown number, I answered cautiously. Hello. A familiar voice responded. It's Aunt Carol. I hadn't spoken to her in at least 5 years. Hi. There was a pause. I read your post, she said gently. Okay. Another pause. Then she sighed. I owe you an apology. I leaned back in my chair. For what? For believing what your mother told us, she said. She said you had some kind of emotional breakdown and cut everyone off. I didn't feel angry hearing that. Just tired. Well, I said quietly. No, you know what actually happened? Yes, she said. And I'm sorry you went through that. Over the next few days, similar conversations repeated themselves. Relatives who had once avoided me started reaching out. Not accusing. Apologizing. Some admitted they had always suspected something was wrong, but didn't want to get involved. Others said they were shocked by the story. But the one person who never apologized was the one who started everything. My mother. 3 days after my post went up, another message appeared from her. Just 3 words again. You embarrassed me. I stared at the screen for a long time. Those words summed up everything. She wasn't sorry for what she said. She wasn't sorry for the lies. She was angry because the truth made her look bad. For years I had twisted myself into knots, trying to earn her approval. Trying to be the daughter she might finally love. But sitting there in my quiet condo, Luna sleeping on the couch beside me, something became incredibly clear. I didn't need her approval anymore. I picked up the phone and typed a response. Just 1 sentence. You set me freeze. I looked at the message for a moment, then I pressed send. Immediately after, I blocked her number. The screen went quiet again, but this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. Because justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like honesty. Sometimes it looks like letting people see the truth for themselves. And sometimes it's something even simpler. Walking away from the people who tried to convince you that your worth depended on their approval. I closed my laptop and stood up. Outside the window, the evening sky was turning soft shades of orange and purple. Luna stretched and walked over, wagging her tail. Ready for a walk? I asked. Her ears perked up instantly. I grabbed the leash, clipped it onto her collar, and headed toward the door. 2 years ago, I had walked away from my family feeling like I was losing everything. Now I understood something I hadn't seen back then. I hadn't lost my family. I had found my life. And for the first time, it was entirely my own.